In today's episode, I speak to Daniel Gibbons, who's a training and engagement lead at Resolve. Resolve are a charity that was founded in 1984 that seeks to reduce the harms caused by volatile substance abuse. This was a really, really interesting conversation for me. I've obviously spent a lot of time working in drug treatment services, and the solvent discussion often kind of just gets brushed to one side. Daniel's insights and information I found really, really interesting. If you're a professional that works with young people, in any setting, this is a really, really useful conversation and chat. You can find out how Resolve can help you by checking out the links in the description below. And if you have any questions at all about solvent use, then please get in touch with them. It's a fantastic organisation and they have so much knowledge and so much information. So without further ado, over to the discussion with myself and Daniel. Hope you enjoy. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more Drug Education Forum content. And check out the Drug Education Forum. We put on free events for anyone in the UK who works with young people. Check out the details of that in the description. Anyway, enjoy the show. Dan, really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Let's get straight into a question that I've been thinking about a lot over the past few weeks when we've been talking about getting this show in. And as you know, I used to work in drug treatment. I spent a lot of time working in drug treatment services, a lot of time educating people of all ages, mainly the 25s, around substance use and harm reduction. And solvents always felt like one of those areas that got pushed to the side a little bit. And we tend to focus on alcohol, on opiates and cannabis. But solvent use, for me, felt like it slipped through the cracks a bit and was almost a discussion that was sort of from the 90s and from a time gone by. So, like, one, do you kind of think that's the case? Are solvents often overlooked? And if you do, why is that?
I would agree with that. Obviously, within my role, it's something I encounter regularly. So I have to appreciate that that's not everybody's experience. But I think a lot of the time, if we're looking at the normalization of other substances, especially with social media, you probably are going to see more of those recreational-based drugs being used more overtly, whether face-to-face, in real life, or kind of behind the scenes virtually. It's still absolutely something that is being used, but naturally to us, it's something that is far more hidden for a variety of reasons, which we may kind of explore later. And the recreational side of solvent use isn't one that we would piece together with solvent use. Typically, somebody probably would be more inclined to use on their own behind closed doors as opposed to face in a group setting.
Yeah. So could you give us just a picture of what that prevalence looks like then? How obviously, yeah, your day-to-day is sort of encountering this regularly, but how big an issue is it at the moment in the UK?
Great question. Kind of quantifying that isn't massively kind of easy in terms of identification. Data and statistics does get generated, but often the reports combine things like solvents, nitrous, helium use even. So we have to kind of break that down and look at kind of trends, local data. I think the latest statistic that we have for young people is around 88,000 young people use solvents annually. I believe that was something from 2024. That's a huge amount in my opinion. Obviously, naturally and thankfully, not everybody is suffering the seriousness of the consequences of that use. But I don't think that's represented in the kind of newspaper. If you speak to most people, they wouldn't probably ascertain that was something that they encounter or their thoughts and feelings. Our phone rings, obviously, at Resolve regularly, daily, with contact requests, people reaching out for support, information around solvent use, whether it be a young person, a parent or carer, or a professional. So we know that behind the scenes that there's a lot of activity, but this doesn't often rise to the surface.
I really want to get into that. The second part of this conversation, we'll get into that hidden nature of solvent use, but it might be worth us just kind of getting into the detail a little bit around what are we talking about here, and why should we be concerned? Because yeah, that's a lot of people. 88,000. That's a lot of people using solvents annually. I would have guessed a lower number than that. And we're going to talk about the sort of classic demographics and some sort of not so much specific case studies, but an idea of the sort of profile of people that use solvents. But what are we actually talking about when we're saying the word solvents? What are the things that people are using?
It can vary. Obviously, as you made reference there, we were founded in 1984, and at that point, we often encounter things like adhesives, so glues, gases, more industrial chemicals. Uh, More modern days, presently at the moment, especially for young people, it tends to be aerosols, body sprays, and typically they're a highly requested item of a young person. They want to meet a hygiene need. They're growing and developing. It's a big part of kind of being kind of presentation, isn't it, amongst other peers and being in a or being a teenager. So often these items are easily accessible. They're justifiably accessed and purchased for legitimate reasons. So alongside that ease of access, if you kind of couple that with somebody that may be struggling, perhaps, so physically, emotionally, it's often within arm's reach. I think the statistic is in any one household there are 20 items that can be used for the purposes of inhalation. So there's a broad spectrum of products, but typically with a young person we would focus primarily around aerosols and body sprays.
Okay. And why would someone use a solvent? What's the so you know again spent a lot of time working with people who have problematic relationships with substances, and the sort of why question is at the core of so many things, isn't it? For helping someone get better physically and psychologically,
Yeah.
why are you doing this is a great line of inquiry to understand how can you not do this.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
we talk about drugs like alcohol and cannabis. Go on, Dan. Sorry, mate. Go on.
no, you're absolutely right. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I think you're absolutely correct. The finding of the why is incredibly valuable, um, because the presentation or the outlet is the substance that that person is using or whatever it is they're finding to therapeutically manage thoughts and feelings, physical or emotional. So trying to understand why um, is incredibly helpful. So you're kind of merging the kind of past with the present, really. I think tying those two ends together is really important in order to have a sustainable, positive outcome for that young person. But you know what, in terms of the kind of interactions, the conversations that we have, there are so many variables as to why a young person has come across or come into contact with a solvent. Um, a lot of the time, through anecdotally throughout my experience, I operate the helpline here and just interacting with young people and professionals. Um, Underneath there is something kind of undulating, and that's typically some emotional um, upheaval that that young person is experiencing. Might seem fairly vague or innocuous to somebody, but to them it's obviously had quite a deep impact, and they're trying to manage that. With young people, we often from the day dot really we often encourage independence and ability to solve your own problems, from tying your shoelaces to probably more difficult things where you're looking at peer pressure. So it's not uncommon if a young people or a young person is faced with something that they find difficult, and there's an element of maybe embarrassment or shame or something personal to it they don't feel comfortable sharing. They're going to try and figure that out on their own. Um, yeah, and it's difficult because for good or for bad, solvents offer a solution. I mean, a dangerous, typically an incredibly temporary solution, but a solution nevertheless. And a young person's probably quite limited to impact their, you know, immediate environment. They can't just jump in a car and take themselves off to see a friend or do some retail therapy or whatever it might be. So they're looking
Yeah.
for immediate solutions in their close environment.
So what's that experience like then? So if someone was to take a solvent, and you have described sort of the broad spectrum of solvents that exist. Obviously, it's maybe not an easy question as it is like, what's it like when someone takes alcohol? But what's the experience like for the individual?
Um, Nuanced. Again, it really can depend on the type of product that is being used. But if we take butane for an example, which is part of the makeup of an aerosol, it's the propelling gas in order to kind of extract the deodorant, the hairspray, the whatever. Butane is a depressant at its core, so it would offer kind of emotional disconnect. It kind of slows down those thoughts and feelings, not too dissimilar to alcohol, really. So, we know that some people may use or misuse alcohol for its kind of sedating or sedative type effect. You know, it's been a busy, stressful week, couple of glasses or whatever, you might find that person then kind of relaxing, temporarily, of course. But in terms of the butane, I think it's just it's almost like a light switch effect. So if you have a young person that's coming home or is at home and they're struggling with thoughts or feelings or wanting to make an instant change, butane will cause that effect. In terms of what that would feel like to the person, again, it can be varied. That there can be a surge or a rush to the system, but that can also be coupled with unconsciousness. It can be fused with intense kind of audible ringing in the ears, almost like a really extreme tinnitus sensation, loss of balance, confusion, anxiety increase, paranoia, hallucinations. There is so much to it that manifests in the brain, which can cause quite an overwhelming sensation to an adult, let alone a younger person who is still in a stage of development, who might not, be in control of their immediate surroundings. So there's a huge amount there, Paul, truthfully.
So you're starting to paint an interesting picture now of demographics and sort of situations that young people might find themselves in, or mindsets they might be in by which solvents are attractive. And is it fair to say then that we're talking about a group of people who maybe don't have access to resources that others might have? You mentioned kind of just jumping in a car and going for a drive and lots of other stuff, which is a great point, that when we're adults, we deal with stress in a wide... we have a wide array of things at our disposal by which we can go, okay, I'm stressed, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, whether that be through time, resources, money. Whereas for young people, they're often kind of sat struggling with a feeling or an emotion and looking around the room thinking, what we're going to do, I can't talk to that person. So it sounds like from what you're saying that solvents kind of in a worrying way can become that temporary escape from that feeling for a young person. So it's like, okay, it will give me quite a strong experience for a short period of time to kind of get me out of this mental loop. Is that fair to say? Am I getting a good understanding of kind of the demographics of people that are the sort of cases?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think interesting, as you were mentioning in there, the kind of escapism, but also control. Yes, it puts you in a state of out of control, but your ability to control how you're feeling or to end how you're feeling is quite powerful. And young people are constantly developing and pushing boundaries and seeing what they have an impact over or what they can affect. Mental health, emotional well-being, however you want to term it, can be quite a lonely, unsettling place. And as you mentioned, even for an adult, adults don't get it right. Yes, they have more tools to their ability to change their immediate environment. You can nip in a car, you can maybe go shopping, you can pick up a telephone and meet up with some friends, or even then adults may start to choose more unhelpful coping strategies as well. So we're all human at the end of the day. But I think the worrying aspect around solvents is if when we're mixing that potency with that ease of access, I mean, that's a real problem. Not only that, but schools do, through my experience, a lot of good work around preventative information. We've got the education around smoking, we've got the education around alcohol, healthy relationships, etc. But I think solvents is one of those things that young people simply don't piece together that it offers any danger, because it's sold in shops. We see them every day. Maybe even if they've been allowed to buy them, that kind of reinstills that knowledge that, hey, they wouldn't sell me something if it was surely that dangerous, or they wouldn't, they just wouldn't be in existence. And all of these things kind of really trivialize or lull people into a false sense of security. I mean, the warning signs are clear to see on these items. I mean, yes, you've got to look for them. The main job for manufacturers is to sell these items because they have a legitimate kind of hygiene purpose and use to them. And not to kind of plaster a skull and crossbones across the top. But it is quite clear as well, visually on these containers, that use them sensibly and safely, that they'll cause you no harm. But in the alternative use, they can be incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, it's a really good point. That sort of like ease of access, price point, and accessibility, normalization, social expectation to have those products on you, all those things compound, don't they, all together. What are the risks then So, like, why should we be worried about you paint a very clear picture that there are a significant number of young people that are misusing solvent. Well, I guess it's not the only appropriate way to use them is as by their function. So people using them, inhaling them, and you paint a really clear picture around some of the groups of young people who might be using this. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the hidden nature of solvent use in a second. But what are the risks? Why should we be concerned as professionals that work with young people?
I mean, I think for any situation where somebody might be experimenting with substances or using drugs and alcohol, is being alone is a massive risk factor, because the hope would be that in any situation there may be somebody there that can offer you support or emergency intervention or make that phone call, should the worst thing happen. And I think we're often with solvents, it really is a lone substance that is being used. People are using away from other people. And that incredibly increases the risk, because one of the biggest concerns around solvent use is the risk of sudden death, which again is something that you might see on products. It's known as the SAKI logo, which stands for Solvent Abuse Can Kill Instantly. And although it's not necessarily seconds, it's minutes, it's as instant as you probably are going to want it to be. So a lot of the time, the risk around the use or the inhalation of solvents relies around the heart. So if somebody is inhaling a deodorant that contains butane, for instance, that causes the heart to have like an arrhythmia, which is it starts to flutter, or it might feel to the person that's using like your heart skipping a beat, or it's kind of having a fluttering effect internally. At that point, the heart's in quite a precarious, delicate situation. The person that's using probably won't know how delicate, but it really is. All that needs to happen from that point is a rush or a surge of adrenaline to be released, and that will ultimately cause a cardiac arrest. The heart can't cope with that. It overloads the system, and it causes the heart to kind of stop beating effectively. What could cause an adrenaline response? Who knows? I think across words, an angry phone call, somebody coming home early than expected when you'd planned to do X, and somebody has kind of knocked your plans to the side, as it were, a confrontation. And let's not forget that internally, how solvents and butane can manifest. They can cause things like paranoia, increase in paranoia, and increase in anxiety, some audible and visual hallucinations. That really wouldn't take much to cause somebody some sort of distress, and consequentially, that could cause the cardiac arrest.
Is there any sort of tolerance element at play by which someone would need more to feel the same effect, or does it not kind of work like that as a substance?
Yes, it does. Solvents can build tolerance. I think the slight different, the interaction. Obviously, at Resolve, we also work with adults that use solvent-based products. Typically, with adults, their use is fairly consistent. It's normally a daily activity, and it's an all-day activity. So tolerance would build quite quickly. So to the person, of course, they are intoxicated. The solvent is having an effect, but their ability to kind of handle that, and maybe the sensation that it gives the person that's using is less. So they may tend to kind of chase that effect, chase that feeling, as it were, maybe by using huge amounts of quantities or using multiple drugs at the same time. Young people, it seems to be more sporadic. Again, not really having full control of their diary, as it were, school, family meetings, or interactions with professionals. There's a lot going on there for a young person, that they would have more opportunistic use. So I often experience that it's more condensed. So maybe if they have an opportunity, they would use quite a bit in a very short duration, but there may be certainly hours, maybe even days between using. Now, tolerance can build in any of those situations, but arguably if you've had a day, 2 days off, the feeling that you would get once again would be amplified. So it really can vary. So yes, tolerance can build, but it's a relatively shorter experience tolerance, especially if you're kind of using one day and then not for a couple of days. So that sensation that drives the potential for use is always there waiting.
Yeah, Yeah, that's again like another concerning element, I guess, of the people's use of the drug. So you've mentioned a few times this sort of concept of it being a drug which is quite hidden. So young people that have problematic alcohol use or problematic cannabis or whatever else, it's often something that's both in public or in their social circle and hidden at home. So people think, God, they drink quite a lot, but they don't realise they also drink quite a lot at home as well. Same with cannabis. Like, oh, they always smoke weed in our social group, but they also don't realise they're doing it loads at home. Solvent use is something that only really exists in that sort of hidden private setting then, from what you're saying. It's less a substance that sort of people will use recreationally, openly, kind of as a recreational drug. It's much more hidden.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are pockets of use with peers, friends, associates, maybe down at the park where young people are concerned, where maybe it might be introduced in that form as a bit of fun, a bit of a laugh, not really understanding, kind of cognizant of how much danger and risk there is associated. But away from that, and often, or through my experience at least, when somebody may be introduced to it in that social setting, it doesn't take long before that then follows them home. They're no longer using with people anymore, they're using just by themselves. Um, the kind of hidden aspect also probably ties in with the amount of stigma and shame that surrounds solvents. I'd probably like to feel that young people are potentially less affected by that, mainly because of their age, and they're probably less worldly wise of how some people value or define certain drugs, as you've mentioned there, alcohol, cannabis, even cocaine, ketamine now are more considerably socially acceptable than they ever have been before. Whereas if you suddenly mention something like a deodorant or a solvent, you probably would get raised eyebrows. So possibly, I think a young person is aware and understanding that what they are doing, they shouldn't be doing, because hey, it's a body spray or it's another item. So they know that it has a
Yeah,
functional use, and they're using it in otherwise in accordance with its kind of desired purchase.
yeah,
But that certainly does um, amplify that kind of um, that restricted use, as you say, behind closed doors. So there's a huge amount of shame and stigma, and some people also are just not aware that it's a drug. It's a body spray. What are you on about? It's just a deodorant. So a lot of people don't connect those dots either. So sometimes the recognition of what it is that they're doing isn't married when you ask them questions and say, so, are you using any drugs or alcohol at the moment? They probably would sincerely sit there and say, nope. So there's an education that's important too.
yeah, definitely. And drugs have always been at their most dangerous when they're sort of pushed to the edges of society, and that's not me making any kind of case for legislation or policy change. Just an observation that when people feel like it's not a conversation that can be discussed and it's something that's very not very unacceptable, but just kind of, like you said, kind of frowned upon, then it makes it so much harder to have that conversation. It's hard enough for young people to talk about cannabis and alcohol because they're drugs that if they're under 18, they shouldn't be drinking alcohol, and cannabis remains an illicit drug unless you have a medical prescription. So both of those come with sort of stigma and concern to talk about. But young people are able to do it. But solvents, I guess, is like another level of stigma and fear that kind of sits with it. All these things seem to be kind of compounding to create this quite a problematic situation. Is it the case then, if we were to sort of help just build out that picture a little bit more of what a classic solvent, someone that has a problem with solvent use would look like, that their use would be sort of in the bedroom, in between lessons. It would sort of be in toilets. It would be sort of very out of the way, very, very hidden. And I guess also in terms of spotting some of those signs, it wouldn't be unusual at all to hear someone spraying a deodorant can with just a very normal noise in a household.
Yeah, I think again, and forgiven is the wrong word, but I absolutely can understand why we get phone calls from people and that they berate themselves that they should have seen it or they should have spotted something, or how come they didn't know. And I kind of say to them, listen, not only are people going to great lengths in order to kind of conceal their use, but a lot of these items are just normal household items, amongst your busy life of work and bills and plans, you walk into a room that's heavily scented with deodorant, or somebody's requesting another deodorant from you again, you're going to pop it on the shopping list. You're just going to go, oh, open a window. You'll fleetingly think about it, but you probably go no further. If you wanted to kind of compare that to, I don't know, a little grip seal baggie that contains some kind of green foliage or some sort of herbal plant within
Yeah.
it, or a syringe or a grinder, you probably would be, alarm bells would be ringing. So I think
Yeah.
this all builds, and I think you're asking all the right questions, but it certainly builds all of the pictures towards why, even at 88,000, and I don't want to say it's any more than that, but that possibly could even be more conservative a statistic, and than we actually realise, because how many people are, presentation is low, intervention is low, so support is low, and sometimes the kind of wheels move within wheels, and it's very hard to either get somebody to come forward and ask for support, or for you to get to such a stage where that person comes forward and says, listen, I'm not in a great way. I really need some help. So it's we're up against it in so many ways, and naturally there is a reluctance to engage upon it because of its delicate nature. Because the theme of solvents is one that has people a little bit on the back foot. How do I ask the questions? I don't really want to incite any behaviour, and all completely valid. I think there are sometimes ways that you can interact with somebody, or you can spot signs that maybe somebody's struggling, that doesn't require you to jump straight in there with, are you using solvents? Caught you, you've been using solvents, or anything like that. But it's very piecemeal. It's almost like a jigsaw puzzle. Putting those pieces together is really quite important to in order to kind of strike up that conversation, or to intervene.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what are some of the, having said that, what are some of the sort of key indicators or red flags by which someone should think about getting in touch with yourself, whether that be someone who's caring, a loved one, a friend of someone, or an individual? What are some of those key indicators?
Um, some are quite overt, quite easy to identify, as I briefly alluded to, in terms of requests of more products. If you've done the shopping, you've bought a deodorant, and then suddenly next week, or even sooner than that, there's another request. Not conclusive in and of itself, but it starts to paint a bit of a picture, maybe a pattern of behaviour that's worth just reflecting on, and maybe starting to have a bit of a look around. Hidden items, so items that are not being disposed of through the typical route, which is in the bin or in the recycling. Um, we've had many calls before where the reason why they've called us is they've been tidying the bedroom or somebody's bedroom, and behind the chest of drawers, behind the bed, behind the wardrobe, there's multiple cans, 20, 30 cans that have been hidden away, which again isn't conclusive in and of itself, but it certainly is quite a big red flag that would require you to take a closer look. Um, we can look at things such as filter marks or stains. Sometimes people have a habit of spraying these items on or through material or fabric or something similar to that. That will leave a residue, that will leave a staining of the item. Might not necessarily come out in the wash, or you've washed some clothes and it's still coming out heavily fragranced, which again is the washing machine or the non-bio not able to break down the chemicals or the enzymes enough to kind of properly rinse and clean it. Um, but again, through your busy lives, you're probably not stopping to look specifically at that. I think gut instinct is a massive driver. If you feel that something isn't particularly right behaviorally, somebody doesn't feel their character is something's not, there's been a change. Could it be a friendship change? Could it be a big change in year group at school? It doesn't inherently point towards solvent use, but there's something happening there for that person. Is that person spending a lot of time behind closed doors? So are they in the bathroom for a long time? Again, no problem with that. People like to spend time in a bath and have a shower. There's no problem with that. But piece that together. Are you hearing the spraying or the discharging of an aerosol? You walk into very heavily scented rooms. Has somebody suddenly asked for a lock on their bedroom door for privacy reasons? People walking in the middle of the night, so late night trips to the bathroom when everybody's in bed and there's movement coming from bedrooms. And then finally, I think it's a very quick behavioural change. So somebody coming very elated, very erratic. So they're talking quite animatedly. They seem stimulated to a degree, but then I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, they're a bit more subdued, a bit more detached, a bit monosyllabic, not particular. So there's been a very quick change in character there, which again, it's not 100% bona fide that it's solvents, but there's something else going on there that's kind of giving that perception that there's a very quick change in character, which is often or can be connected to kind of drug taking behavior. And then finally, on the flip side of that, if somebody's kind of groggy, detached, not getting out of bed, struggling to get out of bed, constantly looking quite subdued and sedate, maybe a flushing of the sinuses, potentially reminiscent of more kind of hay fever-esque type symptoms, reddening of the eyes, even slurred speech, poor balance and coordination can all be the side effects of solvents. It would be more atypical that somebody would use a solvent behind closed doors and then maybe come out of their room or place within 10-15 minutes. At that point, you probably would see something. Again, could be explained away. Got a headache, got a bit of a cold, didn't sleep too well. And you might go, okay, you sure? So again, there are so many bits and pieces to kind of go on there, and all of them are much harder, I would argue, than maybe your more commonly interacted with drugs such as alcohol and cannabis and such.
That's really, really helpful information, and sort of reminds me of a lot of the conversations I used to have with parents when I worked in treatment services, of saying these are the signs, but they're also signs of just a young person growing up. So paint a picture. Don't be like, haha, you did this, so therefore you're doing that. Like, but I guess the thing to remember is, if someone is problematically using solvents, then those things you mentioned will at some point be present. Like that they are, most of those things will transpire at some point, right? That they're indications that someone is using solvents, but also just things that young people experience and go through. So it's hard, isn't it? I guess it's about people building that picture, and I guess hopefully having a conversation, just but that I think for a lot of parents, carers, and loved ones, friends, that's always the hardest bit. It's kind of like, okay, I've got this suspicion, or maybe I just know, maybe I just know, maybe someone's told me or I've seen something. I just know. The hard bit is then the conversation. What kind of advice do you have around that for professionals and parents, carers, around that conversation?
It's always one that we would actively encourage, but it's also making sure that it's done at the most reasonable or the best opportunity, because the conversation can be had, but if you're rushing out for school or you're late for work, or off the back of some sort of confrontation about something, it's not going to elicit the best response. Engaging on topics with young people can be difficult, and I think some young people feel they are or they don't have the requisite knowledge in order to accurately have that conversation. It may be slightly different for you or I. It's the world that we've been in for a number of years, but I would then happily say, I don't think it would be a conversation that I would enjoy having with anybody, because it's one that is quite emotive. You can see maybe somebody that is struggling, and it's never a conversation that you would like to have. But I think the conversation should be approached. Finding the right time is really important, as I've mentioned before, where you're going to get the most positive response from the young person. Typically, when you've got a little bit of time together, there's no kind of rush or impetus to kind of, to be an appointment or anything like that. Coming at it from a place of care and sincerity. Internally, you might be at your wit's end, incredibly cross, angry, confused, and they're all legitimate and genuine feelings to have. But I think, to the best of your ability, if you're able to come across as caring and supportive while you approach that, that's going to have the best outcome. The outcome may not be one that you want, in terms of quite naturally when we're faced with a mirror, so to speak, and we know inherently we're doing something that we shouldn't, there is a tendency to obfuscate, to deny, and hopefully it will just go away. So that's also quite common, shaking of the head going, I don't know, I'm fine, I don't know what you're going on about. And that's okay. And pressing any further at that point probably is going to drive that person deeper into a state of having, kind of keeping and maintaining that point of view and that stance. Neither is it probably beneficial to come up with a whole, almost like a courtroom with evidence and right, because as much as naturally we might get a bit heated because we care. I think conversely that would drive somebody to probably either start to hide, to kind of take their usage and drive it further underground. So it's incredibly difficult, and you will know yourself, having conversed with parents and they're incredibly upset and rightfully so, and quite emotional, and they say, well, what can I do? So engaging on it at the most opportune time is really important. Making sure that you have a good amount of time to cover that conversation. As I mentioned to a little bit ago, butane can put an extra stress on the heart. What we wouldn't actively encourage is for you to pounce on somebody. Isn't, if they've come out of their bedroom or the bathroom and they've been gone, or you've not been with them for an extended period of time, an hour, a couple of hours, if we're being honest, would be really, really valuable. It's making sure that they haven't just used and then you have that conversation with them. That may trigger that response to the heart, which would be dangerous. So it's finding the opportunity, it's piecing together the signs, and it's kind of leaving that door open. And that isn't meant to be quite a poor, watered down response, but a conversation is the start. I think you're able to revisit that. If things aren't going so well and you've broached it, it's okay to leave that conversation and to revisit it. But at the same time, in the background, just keep an eye on what's coming and going from the house, how that person is, checking in with them, maybe arranging a good, I know it sounds maybe a bit cheesy, but a day out, a time out together where they feel relaxed, you're having a good time, and maybe that will be an opportunity to have a conversation about how things are going, how's school going, how's that relationship going, what about your friends, and see if you can build a bit of a picture. Because I think honestly, they find it as an answer to something that they're struggling with, and I think if they found a more positive outlet or a more constructive outlet, they would prefer that 9 times out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It was such great points. I've always felt like that's the key element with parents, carers, friends, etc. Is that it's kind of like really need patience, which is difficult because the tension point with the patients, particularly with solvents, is like, but it can have an immediately life-threatening effect. It can kill people straight away. So it's kind of like, it's quite easy for a professional, for us to go, be patient, but then in the shoes of, putting our sort of, different set of shoes on, you would hear that and go, I don't want to be patient. I want them to be okay. Like if you want to help, go on, mate, go on.
No, sorry, Paul, and I echo that point because it does sound a bit high and mighty coming from the chair of, well, you're not in this situation. How can you possibly just say, well, these steps are really helpful when I'm, I feel like there's a ticking clock metaphorically and I need help and support now. And I fully advocate that. And if you wanted to be proactive without causing a huge scene, again, removing those opportunistic items in the house doesn't mean walking around with a big box and just scooping them all in front of that person, but removing them subtly. Because at 11 o'clock at night, at 12 o'clock at night, if that person is nipping to the toilet or whatever, if there's something there, the chances are that temptation is too real and it's there and I can access it. So removing items is helpful. Replacing sprays with roll-ons is something that we always go to. They can still meet a hygiene need, but they can't be used in the same way, so they don't offer any risk as far as inhalation is concerned. And again, is there somebody that might resonate with that young person? Because as parents, as guardians, as professionals, it might be, of course you're going to tell me that. Of course you're going to tell me, get off my back. You're always having a go. Is there somebody else within their in the family, in friends that may listen to, that may strike a chord with them. That exploring all avenues. The more help, the better. Truthfully speaking, the more help, the better. But I'm also very mindful, as you've mentioned, Paul, there, of not being kind of, high and mighty, and coming across as that kind of, do as I say, and I
Yeah,
do
no,
understand the emotions behind it, and they're very real.
yeah, 100%. I'm a big fan of well, everything you just said there, but in particular, one thing that I would always emphasize when I worked with carers, there was a period in my career where I was doing a lot of work with carers of people who had a drug and alcohol problem. And obviously, really, it was group sessions that I ran actually. They're really difficult groups because you're bringing together a lot of people who are experiencing incredibly challenging situations with sons, daughters, partners using heroin, alcohol, incredibly problematically. And there was always this really sensitive part of the discussion which was around enabling. And you would find it often split the room. There'll be some people that are like, I will enable in the sense of like, if they need money, I'd rather give it to them to stop them stealing. And if they need a drink, I'd rather give them drinks to do X, Y, Z. And then other people took a very hard line approach of like, no, I'm sort of a tough love thing. And I think that conversation's really important. And solvents we're dealing with different demographics to problematic heroin users, alcohol users, but the premise is the same of like, if you can do things that make the more steps in between an individual problematically using a drug and using a drug, that is a good thing. You don't have to kind of lock them in a room, and we're not talking about the extremities there, which are always problematic of both ends. But like, if you can create more time by which an individual has to take to make a decision, you're doing them a good thing. If you can reduce the number of solvents, maybe put them in awkward places, maybe have them in your room so they've got to, you're kind of monitoring them. So all those things feel like really, really sensible steps, because I think another thing that you've said that's really insightful is that there's a misconception around drug use that people they kind of want that lifestyle. No one really wants that lifestyle. People want that experience of getting away from something that's going on in their brain, but they're rarely going, oh yeah, I just want to kind of do, I don't want, they want the lifestyle of their peers, of people around them that they're kind of aspiring to. And I think it's important to have faith in an individual, and by buying more time, you buy them more time to go, I actually don't want to do that. I'm glad there wasn't a solvent in that drawer. I'm glad they'd actually all been taken and put somewhere else, because it buys that individual a little bit of time to just change that pattern. So I think that's really, really good,
Yeah, I think that's incredibly
sensible
valuable,
advice.
and I'd probably couple with the point that you've made there with also trust. It's really important to build trust. What we don't want to do is have a separation between parent, carer, guardian, and it's like an us and them mentality where you're the prisoner, I'm the jailer, and that will only disconnect, and that will drive a further wedge, and you will drive that person into maybe somebody else's peer group or somebody else's arms, or they will just go to further lengths to conceal their use. I think trust, yes, trust can be broken, but it also has to be then um, built back up again, and you need to provide those opportunities for that young person to build self-esteem, to grow, to build confidence and trust. Because if all of that is removed, then what's the point? Why not continue? And if a young
Yeah.
person is already feeling at a low ebb, they probably don't need much encouragement to just to continue and go all out. So it it's such, I mean, it's such a nuanced situation depending on what that young person is experiencing, and I've experienced all manner of reasons from the end of a telephone, and sometimes it's just a case of listening and having that. And then that's another really important, it's building resilience within both the parent and the young person. The parent, the carer, the guardian, the professional needs support, and we often offer that outlet for them to call, and I've spent hours on the phone to people, just allowing them to speak, reflecting ideas, or just being that person that I can listen to, because they don't feel that they can go to their friend or family because of the confusion, the shame, the stigma, the embarrassment, whether rightly or wrongly. And they can pick up the phone and they can speak to somebody at Resolve, and we will exchange ideas and thoughts, or sometimes just listen and absorb that and allow them to take that weight off, so they've got another day in them, that they can give that energy back to the young person, so they can be that figure of support. Because you know heaven knows it's difficult for both, and as you've identified, and again, the person that's using wants that release, but they don't want to feel like that. They don't want to feel kind of tired and dazed and confused, and increase in anxiety and poor sleep, and the way it can kind of degrade and damage the skin and your hair, and just how it makes you feel. They want to be rid of the emotional side, but they don't really want to be feeling like that. Nobody really does. So it's trying to find an alternative. But yeah, I love all the points you made there, Paul, and I agree.
Great. I'm going to put all the information about the organisation in the description so that people can find. So, but could you just give us a little bit of a guide as to what sort of support and services exist for professionals and adults and young people? Like, how can they? Is it a case of just getting on the phone and giving you a ring? Should they go on the website? What's some of the, what can they do?
All of the above. I mean, the website is I think quite easy to navigate. So even if you didn't want to physically speak to somebody, there are resources. There are kind of adult-friendly guides on bits of information. In fact, quite in-depth bits of information, but you get to choose how you receive that information around solvents and nitrous and gas and glue. That's all very, very useful, and you can kind of self-educate in that capacity if you'd like. I would always encourage people to make physical contact. So you can either do that by giving us a call on our office number or our helpline number, which are all on the website, or we have a live chat offer. So on our website, there's a little box at the bottom that pops up and says, "Would you like to speak to somebody?" If you click yes, you probably come through to me or a colleague at Resolve, and that's more of an anonymised way. So you don't have to give us your name or any of those details, but you can ask those questions in a way. And I've had it before where somebody's in the room with their child, they're live chatting me on their mobile phone because they're trying to get information and support whilst, you know, I guess surreptitiously while they're trying to offer support to their young person. So there are great ways of doing so. Frank is a well-known website. I think it's really factual. It's easy to access. And on Frank's website, I believe at the one of the tabs you can enter your postcode, and it tells you within your area where the support is. So it will point you in the right direction for either some of the big organisations which we know about, or more localised. We specialise in solvent use support, advice and education, so you more than likely would be referred to us. We get a lot of referrals through from Frank. But if there was other elements alongside that, then naturally we would provide those pathways of support as well.
What a great service! It's so important. Like, that's so great to hear that you're doing that work. Because again, from working in the sector for a good chunk of my career, it's so important that people can get that information quickly and accurately, rather than having to then do, like, the fact someone could live chat you while having a conversation, or have the conversation and then get on the phone with you, or be thinking about the conversation and get on the phone and then have that. That's ace. That's so good. And prior to knowing about the work that you do, if someone said, "What do you do about solvents?" I'd be thinking, "Oh man, well, you'd have to do a load of research on your own, which is stressful, and then you'd probably have to call a local drug treatment service, and they'd probably maybe call you back with someone in the service that knows a bit." It's just very kind of like long. It's quite a long-winded process, and then you're not dealing with specialists. So the fact that you exist for this issue is so good. I'm so glad you exist.
Yeah, I think setting people's expectations is always a bit heartbreaking, really, because I know when people speak to you, it's typically because they're in crisis, because it's gotten to a point where they've tried to manage it and it's not worked. There is always a bit of a lead time with anything, unfortunately, and we're a charitable service, and most kind of sort treatment services, educational services are charitable based, so they rely upon funding provided by a variety of areas. We're currently funded by the big lottery, which is amazing, which allows us to continue our work for a period of time. But then we're relatively small as well. We're kind of Midlands based, but we cover the national remit. So up and down the country, we have contact from everybody from kind of Land's End to John O'Groat. So we often have to provide remote assistance and support. So that's often where we utilize technology and FaceTime or WhatsApp or whatever it might be, but really kind of channeling them into their local support. And we will stay on board and offer that kind of trifecta of support, but making sure they can get in front of somebody. And I believe having kind of face-to-face support can really add value to kind of long-term success, really. So we would encourage as much support
Yeah,
as
for sure.
possible.
Yeah, for sure. I just love the fact that I think speed of intervention and clarity of intervention is so important when helping people unpick problematic patterns. And yeah, I agree that there's a lot of value in face to face, but I think there's huge amounts of value in just expertise, subject matter expertise, and speed of engagement. Even if it is just that, like, it's going to be okay, you've done the right thing. You know what I mean? Like, even if it's just that you're in a really difficult situation, but just some reassurance around lots of people experience this with the right tools, the right information, things are going to be all right.
Fully
You know,
agree.
like I think that's really nice for people to hear. I feel like I'll keep this chat going for a long time, Dan. There's loads of really interesting elements of the discussion today that we've drawn parallels to other problematic drugs that people use, but I think you've made such a great case that solvents do need to be talked about very differently. We have quite a unique challenge and a unique problem with solvents, not only in how they're used as a substance, but also just the nature of it, what solvent use looks like. And I'm really glad you've spoken to me on the podcast. I'm really glad that you've engaged with the Drug Education Forum and spoken to our members. You've also kind of set out where people can get in touch with you. I'll put all the details in the description of the channel. Of the video, but yeah, I really appreciate this chat today, Dan, and yeah, nice one for all the work that you're doing.
No problem. It's been lovely to be on. And I think a lot of the time, having this as a reference, or you touched on it just then, is making people feel that they're not alone. Often in these more niche areas, people feel it's unique to them, and that's not kind of trivializing or what have you, but that nobody understands. Who do I speak to? And having that person who has engaged with other people, who does understand, who can listen, who kind of gets where they're coming from, can be incredibly valuable.
Agree. Daniel, thanks so much for your time, mate. I appreciate you loads.
No problem. Nice to see you.
Thanks so much for watching today's show. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you can find out about Resolve, you can find out about the Drug Education Forum in the description. We put on completely free events which you can attend to find out the latest, most relevant information around drugs education in the UK. Check us out, join the DEF, see the description. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more drug education content. Thanks for watching.